On July 8, 2026, Peter Obi sat down with media personality Chude Jideonwo for an interview. He was asked a simple question: will you be on the ballot in 2027? His answer was not what anyone expected. He said, "Not even a candidate. I might not even be alive. I am telling you, every single thing I do for a living, this government is frustrating it, deliberately so. Everything. So there is even a possibility, if they have the opportunity, I will not be alive." Those are Peter Obi's exact words, verified, published across Vanguard, PM News, Sahara Reporters, Daily Post, Business Day, The Sun, and Channels TV. The presidential candidate of the NDC, the man who got over 6 million votes in 2023, went on a national podcast and said the government may have him killed before the next election. That statement has generated enormous reactions across Nigerian social media in the last 48 hours. His supporters are outraged. His critics are calling it exaggerated. The government has not issued a formal security response, and Kwankwaso has said publicly that the government's reaction to the threats against Obi's life is worrisome. But here is the question that most Nigerian media is not asking clearly enough. What exactly is Peter Obi alleging? Is he claiming a specific assassination plot? Is he describing economic and political persecution? Or is he signaling something deeper about the NDC's situation that he cannot say directly? Because when you look at what has happened to Peter Obi, to the NDC, and to the opposition in the last 60 days, the picture that emerges is more complicated and more alarming than a single quote from a podcast. Stay with me. If you are new to Pulse Nigeria HQ, this channel exists to give Nigerians the honest political analysis that mainstream media will not touch. Subscribe now and stay with me, because this video goes deeper than the headline that is currently dominating Nigerian Twitter. Reading the full statement, not just the headline. Let us read what Peter Obi actually said in full, because the headline version and the full version are two different things, and understanding the difference matters enormously for this analysis. The headline version is Peter Obi says he may not be alive by 2027. That version implies a specific death threat, a named target, and a government assassination plot. That is what many Nigerian social media users have taken from the statement. The full version is more nuanced. Obi said, "Every single thing I do for a living, this government is frustrating it, deliberately so. Everything. So there is even a possibility, if they have the opportunity, I will not be alive. I get frustrations every day because you do things that you may think may be normal. It is not normal. They will not come directly and say, oh, we are doing this, but you could see their hand in eventually everything." Read that carefully. Obi is not saying a specific person has threatened to kill him. He is saying the pattern of deliberate frustration and systematic obstruction is so intense that he cannot rule out being killed if the government has the opportunity. He is describing an environment of persecution rather than a named threat. He gave two specific examples to ground this in reality. First, he said people who invite him to their children's weddings have called him and asked him not to come because his presence creates problems for them. Second, he described an incident at an airport where officials locked only his vehicle while ignoring all other cars parked in the same area. When he identified himself, the officer in charge said he did not care. These examples are small. They are not assassination attempts, but they are the kind of targeted, deniable daily harassment that tells a person they are being watched and deliberately made uncomfortable by forces they cannot directly confront. That is what Obi is describing. And the question is whether that description, coming from Nigeria's most prominent opposition presidential candidate in the months before an election, deserves to be taken seriously. Kwankwaso's response provides important context. He said publicly that the government's reaction to the threats against Obi's life is worrisome. Not what Kwankwaso did not say. He did not say the threats were exaggerated. He did not say Obi was dramatizing. He said the government's reaction, specifically the absence of visible protective response, is what concerns him. That is a very specific political signal. In Nigeria, when a presidential candidate of an opposition party says his life is under threat, the minimum expected government response is a visible security review and a public statement of commitment to his safety. The fact that Kwankwaso is drawing attention to the absence of that response tells you he does not believe the government has responded adequately. And there is a historical dimension to this that no Nigerian political observer can ignore. Nigeria has lost opposition political figures to suspicious circumstances before. The pattern of suspicious deaths, disappeared witnesses, and politically inconvenient accidents is not a conspiracy theory in Nigerian political culture. It is documented history. That history is the background against which Obi made this statement, and that is why it landed the way it did. What has actually happened to Peter Obi since he joined the NDC? Let us examine the specific events that form the backdrop to Obi's statement. Because if he is right that there is a deliberate pattern, the evidence should be visible in documented events. And if we look at what has actually happened to him and his party since May 2026, the picture is striking. First, the NDC's legal existence has been under sustained legal attack. The party's registration was reversed by the Federal High Court in Lokoja on June 26 over a logo dispute with the Peace Movement Party. The case went on appeal. The NDC filed its candidate information with INEC before the July 11 deadline while the appeal was pending. As of today, the NDC's legal status as a registered party remains in a state of contested uncertainty. Let me be precise about what that means practically. A presidential candidate whose party's legal registration is in active court dispute is a candidate who could technically be removed from the ballot at any point before the election if the court rules against the party. That is not a physical threat to Obi's life, but it is an existential threat to his candidacy that operates through legal mechanisms rather than direct confrontation. The legal pattern that connects everything. Here is the institutional pattern that most people covering this story are not connecting. Peter Obi left the Labour Party after what he described as the Nigerian state creating crises and hostility within the party. He joined the ADC, which then descended into internal factional warfare that made it unusable as a platform. He moved to the NDC, which immediately faced a court order threatening its registration. He said himself at a press conference when leaving the ADC, the same Nigerian state and its agents that created unnecessary crises and hostility within the Labour Party now appear to be finding their way into the ADC. 3 parties, 3 crises, each one conveniently appearing at the moment when Obi's presence gives the platform serious electoral weight. That pattern is what Peter Obi is describing when he says he can see the government's hand in eventually everything. He is not describing a specific death threat. He is describing a systematic strategy of legal and political destabilization. Second, his business interests have reportedly faced interference. Obi said on the podcast that every single thing he does for a living is being frustrated by this government. He did not provide specific business details on air, but Obi is a businessman with extensive commercial interests. A campaign by government agencies to audit, investigate, or simply create administrative delays for those businesses would be expensive, distracting, and psychologically exhausting without ever producing a single chargeable offense. Third, the airport incident he described. Officials locking only his vehicle while ignoring all other cars in the same area. That incident may sound minor, but it reflects a pattern of petty official harassment that communicates a clear message without ever crossing the line into actionable misconduct. The message is, we see you, we are watching you, and your life will be made difficult in ways you cannot formally complain about.
Taken individually, these events are explainable. Taken together, as Obi is presenting them, they form a picture of systematic targeted pressure that he says is unprecedented in his experience of Nigerian political life.
The NDC is already showing the cracks that broke every previous platform. Now, let us talk about what is happening inside the NDC itself, because while Obi is describing external persecution, there is a simultaneous internal story developing that is just as important for understanding whether the NDC can actually get him to January 2027 as a viable presidential candidate. The NDC primaries were held in June 2026. Peter Obi emerged as the presidential candidate, which was expected. Kwankwaso was confirmed as his running mate. The party presented itself as unified and ready. But the aftermath of those primaries, as reported by Premium Times on July 6th, tells a different story. Obi's own supporters fell short in several key constituency primaries. The most prominent case involved Aisha Yesufu, the co-convener of the Bring Back Our Girls movement and one of the most recognizable faces of civic activism in Nigeria. Yesufu joined the NDC in May 2026, following Obi from the ADC. She declared her intention to contest the FCT senatorial seat. According to the NDC's own National Secretary, Ikenna Enekwezu, the party leadership, including Obi himself, preferred that she contest for the House of Representatives Amak and Gwari constituency seat rather than the Senate. The national leader of the party, Senator Seriake Dickson, met with her twice to persuade her to step down from the Senate race. Yesufu refused. She said she was bigger than the rep's office. She insisted on the Senate ticket. She ran. She lost the primary. The NDC's response was to tell her she should use the party's internal dispute resolution mechanisms if she felt aggrieved. Yesufu has not yet made a public statement about her next steps as of this recording. The Aisha Yesufu story reveals something deeper that the party would prefer not to be discussed publicly. The NDC is a pre-existing party with its own members, its own candidate relationships, and its own internal power structures. When Obi, Kwankwaso, Yesufu, and 17 House of Representatives members moved from the ADC into the NDC, they entered a party that already had candidates in place for many of the seats they wanted to contest. Seriake Dickson, the NDC's national leader, had already built relationships with candidates for the Amak and Gwari seat before Yesufu arrived. The party wanted Yesufu to fit into a structure that was built before she came. She wanted the party to accommodate her ambition. That conflict between the newcomers who brought the political momentum and the original members who built the party structure is precisely the kind of internal tension that has broken every previous platform Obi has been associated with. It is happening again, earlier this time, in a party that has not yet even reached the election. There is also a broader pattern emerging from the NDC primaries that deserves attention. Of the 17 House of Representatives members who defected from the ADC to the NDC in May 2026, at least some of them entered primary contests against existing NDC candidates. The outcomes of those contests and whether the losing sides accept the results or challenge them through courts or party mechanisms will significantly affect the NDC's organizational unity heading into 2027. An opposition party preparing for a presidential election does not need internal primary disputes consuming its energy, resources, and media attention. The ADC is currently dealing with exactly this problem. The Labour Party dealt with it after 2023, and the early signs from the NDC primaries suggest the same dynamic is beginning to take shape. Drop a comment right now. I want to know. Do you believe Peter Obi's life is genuinely under threat from the government, or do you think he is describing the normal pressures of Nigerian opposition politics? Tell me your honest view before we get to the section that puts everything in context.
Taking the threat seriously. What Nigerian political history demands. I want to be careful here Because there is a real risk in this story of two opposite errors. The first error is to dismiss Obi's statement as political theater, designed to generate sympathy and mobilize supporters. The second error is to treat it as confirmed evidence of a government assassination plot without specific evidence. Both errors are irresponsible, and Nigerian history gives us reason to resist both of them. Nigeria has experienced the suspicious deaths of politically significant figures at politically significant moments. The deaths of Moshood Abiola in 1998, just as he was about to be released from detention. The deaths of Bola Ige and Marshal Harry in 2001 and 2003 respectively, both opposition figures shot by gunmen in their own homes. The death of Ahmed Gulak in 2021, killed in Owerri while returning from a political visit. These are not ancient history. They are within the living memory of Nigerian adults who are watching this video right now. In that context, when a major opposition presidential candidate says publicly that he believes the government may have him killed if they have the opportunity, the appropriate response from the Nigerian state is not silence. It is a visible, documented, serious security review. The appropriate response from civil society is also not dismissal. It is pressure on the government to account for the candidate's safety in a way that can be independently verified. The appropriate response from the opposition is also not simply amplifying the statement for political effect. It is demanding a formal security briefing and making that demand publicly and repeatedly until it is answered. What has actually happened since July 8, when Obi made the statement, is that the story has generated enormous social media traffic, multiple newspaper front pages, and political commentary from every direction. But there has been no formal government security response, no named security detail assigned specifically in response to the threat allegation, no independent review commissioned, no statement from the DSS or the police acknowledging the allegation and committing to investigate it. The government's silence is itself a data point. Here is the uncomfortable truth that this story is revealing. When the government of Nigeria does not formally respond to a presidential candidate's public allegation that his life is under threat from that same government, the silence is not neutral. In the context of Nigerian political history, silence from a government about threats to an opposition figure is a pattern that Nigerians have learned to read carefully. It does not prove the threat is real, but it does not reassure anyone that the government is taking its responsibility to protect political opponents seriously. And in an election year, that lack of reassurance has political consequences that extend well beyond Peter Obi's personal safety. It tells every Nigerian who is considering supporting an opposition candidate what the cost of that support might look like.
What the government is saying and what the opposition is doing. Let us examine both sides of this story honestly, because Obi's statement is not the whole picture, and analytical fairness requires us to present what his critics and his government have said. Former Borno State Governor Ali Modu Sharif said on Channels Television that Northerners will never vote for Peter Obi in 2027 because he is divisive. When reminded that Obi won substantial votes in Nasarawa and Plateau in 2023, Sharif said circumstances have changed. Sharif's position is that Obi's political support is overstated and that his attempt to frame himself as a persecuted candidate is a political strategy designed to generate sympathy he cannot generate through policy or popularity. The Tinubu administration has not directly addressed the threat allegation as of this recording. The government's communications since the podcast clip went viral has been focused on other issues, including the PFIPC scandal and the ICPC investigation. The absence of a specific response to Obi's threat allegation is either a deliberate communication strategy or an oversight that the presidency will need to address quickly as this story continues to grow. On the opposition, Kwankwaso has been the most visible responder. His comment that the government's reaction is worrisome is careful. He is not confirming that Obi's life is under threat. He is saying the government's response is inadequate.
That is a distinction that allows him to stay on the safe side of the allegation while still putting pressure on the government to respond more substantively. Umahi, the Minister of Works, has made a more direct dismissal. He said, "Peter Obi cannot face me, let alone Tinubu," suggesting that Obi's statement is the rhetoric of a man who knows he cannot win a fair political contest. That response is politically pointed but analytically weak. The strength of a threat to a person's safety is not determined by how competitive a candidate they are. A weak candidate can face a genuine death threat just as easily as a strong one. Senator Victor Ume of Anambra Central has accused former Governor Sheriff of trying to whip up ethnic sentiment against Obi in the north. He said Sheriff's dismissal of Obi's northern support is inaccurate and designed to suppress Obi's appeal among northern voters who gave him significant votes in 2023. That debate between those who say Obi has genuine northern support and those who say he does not will be one of the defining analytical questions of the 2027 campaign. What to watch in the next 30 days? Here is exactly what to watch as this story develops over the next month. The first signal is whether the federal government issues a formal security response to Obi's allegation. If the DSS, the police, or the presidency issues a specific statement committing to a security review for Peter Obi as a presidential candidate, that response will either reassure Nigerians or raise further questions depending on its content. If the silence continues, the silence itself becomes the story. The second signal is whether Aisha Yesufu accepts her primary loss or challenges it. Her next move will tell you whether the NDC's internal tensions are manageable or whether they are the beginning of the same factional warfare that has broken previous opposition platforms. If she challenges the result in court, watch how the NDC leadership responds. If they side with her, the original NDC members who beat her will be alienated. If they do not, the obedient movement members who followed her in will feel betrayed. The third signal is the NDC's legal status. The party's registration appeal is before the courts. Watch whether the court issues a ruling before or after the August 1 date when INEC is scheduled to publish the particulars of presidential and National Assembly candidates. If the NDC's registration is not confirmed before that date, there is a question about whether Obi's name can be officially published as a candidate. The fourth signal is Obi's business activities. He said every single thing he does for a living is being frustrated. If specific Nigerian businesses, banks, or regulatory agencies are seen taking actions against Obi's commercial interests in the weeks ahead, it will provide documented evidence for what he is currently describing in general terms. Watch for any regulatory actions, tax authority moves, or bank account restrictions involving businesses connected to Obi. The fifth signal is Tinubu's APC response. The ruling party has been largely quiet on Obi's specific allegation. Watch whether any APC figure makes a statement that directly addresses the threat claim rather than simply dismissing Obi's political viability. The nature of that response will tell you how seriously the APC is monitoring the public reaction to this story and whether they calculate that silence or engagement is the better political strategy.
Here is where we are. Peter Obi has said publicly that the government may have him killed by 2027. The government has not formally responded. Kwankwaso says the government's silence is worrisome. And inside the NDC, the same pattern of internal tension that broke every previous opposition platform is already beginning to show itself in the aftermath of the primaries. Whether Obi's statement was a precise description of a real security threat or a broader expression of the psychological pressure of being Nigeria's leading opposition candidate in an election year, the political effect is the same. It has placed the question of political persecution and candidate safety at the center of the 2027 election conversation. And it has done so in a way that forces the government to either respond substantively or absorb the political cost of appearing indifferent to an opposition candidate's safety. The NDC has the momentum. It has the names. It has the diaspora support. It has the youth energy that the obedient movement represents. But it also has a legal challenge to its registration, an internal primary dispute involving its most prominent activist figure, and a presidential candidate who is publicly saying he cannot guarantee he will be alive to contest the election he is preparing for. If you are Nigerian, that picture should concern you regardless of who you support. A democracy in which opposition candidates fear for their lives is not a democracy that any election can fix on its own. If this analysis gave you a clearer picture of what Peter Obi is really saying and what it means for 2027, share it with one Nigerian who needs to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to Pulse Nigeria HQ, and tell me in the comments, do you think the government is behind the pressure on Obi, or is he overstating the threat? Every honest answer is welcome. I will see you in the next one.